Or, but on the opening couple of days of the conflict, there was reports that they got hit with 4 missiles. Is that the same? Are you talking about the same incident, or was this more recent within the last couple of days?
No, that was the one from the first few days where 3 F-15s were. I mean, 3 friendly fire incidents. No American military analyst believes that. Maybe 1, but not 3. And then that was in Kuwait, and it was struck by Iran. That's what they claim. And then F-18 as well, they claim crashed. And then there was another fighter jet incident. There was like 5 total. Those are confirmed, but the U.S. keeps saying it's friendly fire or they just crashed.
Because I remember when they said that Kuwaiti air defense accidentally shot down a couple of F-15s. They obviously were able to eject safely, use their parachutes, etc. We got pictures of those pilots that survived. But I do remember in the first couple, of days, within like the first 72 hours or so, there was reports of, the Iranians shot ballistic missiles at one of the aircraft carriers. Obviously, the U.S. said that's not true. And I remember they put out a bunch of pictures and videos of the aircraft carrier, jets taking off, everything else like that to say that it wasn't true. But what you're saying is, I guess it was true. And that's why they repositioned. But because I remember for a few days, we didn't know where they were. So would it be fair to say that they repositioned a while ago? It's just that we're finding out about them repositioning a while ago now?
Well, they shut the transponders off. They're keeping it low key. So
of course,
but there may be along the Gulf of Oman. That's what they're claiming. But yeah, they have been repositioned. And again, if they're in positions of authority, well, why do you have no leave? And these are, I believe, nuclear powered aircraft carriers. So they're not there to refuel, right? So
yeah, they are. And that's why I was very because I remember I remember the story broke. I remember Suleiman had told me like, hey, 4 missiles came through and hit one of the aircraft carriers, and I was skeptical. I was like, I don't know if that's true. And then obviously both aircraft carriers kind of went silent. Nobody knew where the hell they were. And then now we're finally getting the reports that both of them repositioned. So that might be what it is, or it could be, maybe they shot them down and they got spooked or whatever. But I would say at this point, it's at least fair to say that the Iranians are posing a threat to both aircraft carriers, which is why they backed up, which I mean, I guess is a part of the, it's a W for them. But it's just interesting because both sides are obviously, pushing out propaganda. I know for a fact the United States is underreporting casualties and damage. I know for a fact that like the day that Kuwait was hit the first day, they only reported, I think, 4 servicemen were killed. But we know somewhere around 140, 150 people were actually injured that day. And we know this because there was some pretty consistent reporting from Kuwaiti hospitals that American soldiers were there in droves. Well over 100 were injured, pretty seriously injured too. But obviously the U.S. government didn't report it until like a couple of days ago. We found out, 150 soldiers were injured, blah, 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 because I guess they couldn't contain it anymore. So they were absolutely holding back information. And then someone else in my community was telling me, pretty much confirmed, and I trust his judgment on this because he's been pretty accurate about other stuff, that there's another 5 to 6 soldiers that have been killed that they're not reporting, and there's a bunch of missing soldiers that went AWOL that they don't know where they are. So the U.S. government is absolutely, underreporting things. And we know this is the fog of war. They don't want people to know. They want to keep morale high, etc. Also, I've heard from multiple people that, they're starting to mobilize more resources in the U.S. They're calling up people, a lot of them for support positions in the Middle East. So, and obviously we know on the Iranian side, right, they're pushing out propaganda as well. They said they sunk an aircraft carrier and all this other shit. So both sides are going to push out their propaganda, and typically the truth is somewhere in the middle. But yeah, it's just very interesting to see all of this kind of play out. But I can say one thing is the United States absolutely underestimated the Iranians. I think at this point we can all confidently say that. It went from a 4-day conflict to, a 4-week conflict to an 8-week conflict, and now we're looking at, them potentially pushing this all the way to the midterms, which I think that the Iranians absolutely have the capability of doing that. I keep seeing Hegseth and other, talking heads saying, 90% of the ballistic missiles have been depleted or blah, blah, blah. And I think they're making the gross error of conflating the fact that the barrages aren't as voluminous as that being them running out of stockpile. What I think that is more than likely is they used a bunch of their, capabilities in the beginning to kind of get the interceptor missiles down. The interceptor missiles are down, and now they're being a bit more strategic and direct with their hits, right? We know that they've taken out a lot of the military bases all across the Middle East, which is half the battle. They've destroyed a significant amount of very sophisticated radars. We're talking about billions of dollars worth of damage. And we've seen them start to do, strikes alongside Hezbollah. I gave this prediction like a day or two ago, and I'll say it again here for the people that are kind of new and not familiar with my stuff. I predict that once they're pretty certain that interceptors are fairly depleted in more than likely, I would say watch out for a three-pronged ballistic missile barrage from the east, obviously, with the Iranians, the north, Hezbollah, and then from the south with the Houthis. The Houthis haven't really been fully activated yet. I know that there's some rumors of them coming in anytime shortly now, if they haven't already been activated. So we'll see what happens, man. And I think that will be, I was talking about this with my brother earlier. I truly do think that this was probably one of the biggest and geopolitical blunders I've witnessed in my lifetime. I think that this is worse than Iraq, because at least in Iraq, George Bush and the neocons had a little bit of the political backing to do it because they had the 9/11 excuse. Dude, this one is a war that we started that no one wanted, and we're feeling the effects of it immediately. You know, people forget that when we attacked Iraq, it took Iraq several months to actually mount a retaliation. It took them about 5 months to hit the United States back where they actually felt it. This time around, the Iranians hit back within an hour, which is incredible. So I don't know. This is just not good. This is not good. This is the worst blunder, worst misstep I've ever seen. And the fact that Donald Trump knew literally days before the attack that there was a very low likelihood of actually getting any type of regime change from many of his intelligence components within the U.S. government, and he still went through with the attack. It's incredible, dude. You know, there's and the thing that kills me, just for those that are wondering too, like, I like Donald Trump. I'm not some bleeding heart progressive. I'm not a leftist. I'm not a liberal. I think they're all I would consider myself more on the right wing, but I got to be honest, when, you know, push comes to shove, and this is like just a huge blunder. This is one of the biggest mistakes I've ever seen a president make. And this is going to have some very serious consequences. At worst, we're talking about market crashes. You know, we're talking about $120 to $200 barrels of oil, of crude. We're talking about economic collapse. We're talking about energy prices in general soaring, just off Qatar closing down the LNG. This is a big. And it amazes me because for all the Americans that are here, I look at a lot of these American YouTubers, they're over here like, you know, yeah, America, fuck yeah, we're destroying these guys, we're winning militarily, blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, yeah, dude, none of that matters because like gas is like $6 a gallon in LA. Like, are you serious? Like, are you fucking? So this is just a big L. And then at best, right, worst is obviously that what we're going right now, which is like with all the price crashes and the, you know, energy Armageddon that we got going on, which is worse than since the 1973 Arab embargo or whatever with oil. At best, we're not going to have a presence in the region anymore. And that's if we're lucky, because I really don't foresee the Gulf countries being able to allow us to maintain the military presence that we're maintaining there right now. Because think about it. If the whole reason we were there was to protect them, and now that the rubber's meeting the road and we're not protecting them, like, they're going to be like, dude, get the out of here. Like, you guys are literally the reason why we got attacked. You guys are literally the reason why we can't get our energy out of the fuck. You guys are literally the reason why our tourism is sinking. You guys are literally the reason why, you know, real estate property in the UAE right now is crashed by like a third year, right? So these are Gulf states that literally prided themselves on safety and stability within a very volatile region. And within the past couple of weeks, their world has literally been shifted upside down. This is something that, you know, for those that aren't familiar with the Gulf, like the Gulf is literally like America, but cleaner, no. It's awesome. If anyone's ever been to Dubai or Qatar, any of these places, but that's what they model their country on. So the fact that that safety has been kind of removed, their energy, their ability to create revenue for their country with energy has been removed. I just don't see us being able to project power in the Middle East like we used to be able before. And I would say the only way that we would be able to maintain that kind of presence in the Gulf after this historic blunder by the Trump administration would be we would need to effectuate a regime change. And let's be honest, I think everyone in here in this space at this point realizes that we're not going to get no regime change because that would require boots on ground, and we're just simply not going to do that. The American public does not have the stomach for it. Even the biggest MAGA understand that boots on the ground is a failure. So if we're not going to effectuate a regime change, the Gulf states have absolutely no reason to keep us in the region, especially since one of the demands that was made by the Iranian government as of the past 48 to 72 hours was we need Americans out of the region. We don't want them in the region. We want reparations. We want reparations. We want sanctions relief. We want payment for all the destruction the Americans did. We want the right to be able to exist and arm ourselves and defend ourselves and not be attacked again. And we want all of the American bases out of the region. And I just don't foresee a scenario where the Gulf states would allow us to maintain that type of military presence in their backyard and make themselves make themselves targets for the Iranians again. I think this creates, you know, openings for maybe the Chinese or the Russians to come in and swoop in. And if we do have a presence in the region with the Iranians still in, it would be extremely limited. It would be maybe from a defensive posture only if we're lucky. So that's what I foresee is going to happen here. And I think Trump has his back up against the wall, and there's not many options he has to get out of this. And I know he's looking for political off-ramp, but I don't think the Iranians are going to give it to him. He said on Air Force One today, oh, they're begging to make a deal. They want to make a deal. That's a fucking lie, dude. And all these Twitter like Eric Daugherty that are saying, like, believing that, or there is no fun. The Iranians are not going to set a deal until the reason why the conflict is happening in the first place is solved. But I'll land it there.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree with a lot of those points. I'd say part of the blunder is continuing to underestimate Iran, and you even see Dan Kane say it when he states that the missile volume coming out of Iran has been reduced, and that's because they're using more sophisticated missiles,
exactly
like the Khyber Shekan, which has 80 submunitions that Israel's crying about, claiming they're like cluster bombs, even though they used over 1 million cluster bombs against Lebanon alone, and they admitted that. They also used them against Palestinians. So they're complaining it's a war crime to use that type of weapon, even though neither country is a signatory to that weapons convention that other countries have signed off on. So they're allowed to use it. So, I mean, if one missile can do the job of 80, why do they need to send up 30, 40 missiles? They're going to be smart and conservative with their missile stock because they're not planning on a several-week conflict. They're planning on a several-month or several-year conflict. And rumor has it, no one knows for sure what they really have. They may have 250,000 missiles because Hezbollah has about half that, 125. So they have a ton, and they make missiles and drones like matches. Remember, they have their own military-industrial complex, and they have all the inputs themselves. So even if they somehow get, if there's some kind of blockade imposed on them, they can still continue building what they need. And Russia's right next door if they need anything. And they're monitoring closely. Russia and China are providing all kinds of valuable military intel on targets. So they're not wasting much. And like we both agree on, Israel's admitted this. Multiple of their politicians admitted they're now at a critical level for interceptor missiles. So if they can't defend their assets, that's already a sign of a loss. So I don't see an off-ramp either. I think once Iran achieves its targets, then they'll discuss something. It may just be terms of surrender. Same thing is what they're trying to do with Russia-Ukraine. Discuss terms of surrender, but, they can't get Zelensky and NATO to go along with that. So that's, another perpetual war for now. You're going to say something?
No, I mean, those are all very good points. And I think, because if I'm not mistaken, prior to the conflict, they estimated that they had a stockpile of somewhere between 2,000 to 3,000. I agree with you that it's probably far more than that. I know for a fact, for example, the Fatah 1, they started mass producing that after the 12-day war. They literally, that was one of the, capabilities that they enhanced significantly. And obviously we know they have the Fatah 2, which is near unstoppable. And then also I saw today many different people posting it that they used a new missile. I think they debuted it today. It's the Sigil. Yes, the Sigil, which, if I'm not mistaken, is one of their bigger missiles, right, with a bigger warhead.
Yeah, 1.5 ton warhead. So it's one of their heavier ones. Not even their biggest payload. They've got heavier. It's got a bigger range, up to 4,000 kilometers, which they don't need. It's a mid-range missile, ballistic missile that has done some serious damage. But because there's a media blackout in you don't get to see the extent of the damage and what's really happened. The only time they speak out, and I put up all the interviews they've done, both from Gideon Sa'ar, the foreign minister, and also the Israeli president, when he was crying, because they'll only admit they've been struck when it's a residential target. They don't want to admit, say, like when their airfields get struck, like Nevatim, which houses F-35s, or for instance, their ports like Haifa. Those are all strategic sites. Those they just want to deny and claim like everything's fine. And anytime I get Israelis up on the space, they want to claim their air defense systems are like 90% or 100%. Literally, that's what they say. It's not even the engineers claim, and not even the engineers from the U.S. military-industrial complex claim air defense systems are 100%. But yet these Israelis want to claim that they're like impenetrable, which is just bullshit. And there's no answer for the hypersonics anyway. So why lie? But you're hiding their losses anyway.
No, I really, man, I wish we had someone that lives in Tel Aviv or something like that to tell us what the hell is going on, because I am truly curious as to what's going on. I know we've all seen images here and there. We've seen, images hitting everything else like that. But I'd like to see like what the hell is going on, because what I've noticed with that is, number one, only certain people are allowed to photograph or record the damage. One of them is the loser Yosef Haddad, who I'm sure all of you guys are familiar with here that are speakers. But for those that aren't, he's basically, I call him like the propaganda god for Israel, because he fits every archetype. He's an Arab Israeli. He speaks Arabic. He speaks Hebrew. Obviously a hardcore Zionist. He's kind of like Mossab Youssef, aka the son of Hamas. And these guys are like the two big talking heads that are pro-Israel that are Arabs that they use. I'm sure there's others too, but those are like the two most prominent ones. And the only people I've seen that like are actually like fully documenting a lot of the damage, at least on social media that I've seen, are like Yosef Haddad and stuff like that. And they're purposely making sure that he's documenting damage in civilian areas to paint a certain narrative. They're obviously not going to show when strategic locations and military locations are being hit. But I'm very curious to see how badly the Israelis are getting hit, because this censorship that they have going on, I got to give them credit. Like they're doing a pretty good job of doing the censorship. I think they learned from the 12-day war, because during the 12-day war, they also implemented kind of like a blackout, but it wasn't to this level. But from what I've heard from multiple people, they're obviously getting up, but I want to know what the extent of the damage is, and like what places are getting hit. Last time around, I think it's pretty safe to say, Truth, correct me if I'm wrong, on a 12-day war, I know they hit an Amman base, they hit a Mossad base, I think they hit some type of offsite for Shin Bet, and I think they hit something for the IDF, or maybe it was even Unit 8200 maybe, but
yeah, it was both.
Okay, both, right? Yeah.
And I believe the IDF one was under a hospital, which they cried hard about. But like you said, they didn't implement the media blackout until later there, whereas now they did it right from day one.
Yeah.
By the way, Myron, there's one piece of evidence that shows they've been hit hard. And that's there's been over 9,000 insurance claims to date. They won't specify what for.
Oh.
That just goes to show. Yeah, that I have evidence of. That's, Israel has made that claim. I can
That's clever.
put that up in the nest or send it to you. Yeah, so that's a piece of
DM me
evidence.
that, dude. That's actually really clever.
So,
wow. Okay.
For what it's worth, you know how they are with the insurance.
Yeah. They got to get their money immediately.
I don't want to jump to any conclusions here, but the G's don't exactly have the best reputation.
Hey, W Insurance, okay?
Yeah.
Insurance honesty, right, and integrity when it comes to all those places.
They all
have an opportunity to exaggerate to make a few bucks more.
Dude, the most interesting, the most thing ever. It's like they all took a page out of Larry Silverstein's resume, bro. Like, hey, let's all get terrorism insurance and just let the Iranians hit us. We'll make so much money. It's just like